All right, folks, welcome to a brand new edition of In Conversation. And no, we're not on repeat, but we are bringing back a guest that was on here recently, 2023, actually. Mr. Rik Emmett, welcome.
Thank you, Joseph. I like that giant Beatles pic you have back there. Oh, I want one of those for my studio.
I'll tell you how to get one when we're done here. Um,
Okay.
all right, yeah. So a lot going on still with you there, doing a lot of things happening here. And one thing we're going to start talking about right off the bat is the brand new book that you just wrote here. 10 Telecaster Tales.
Yes.
So
If I
tell
had it
us,
handy, I'd hold it up so that we could get a product shot. Um,
think I got one
yeah.
here.
There we go. There's a product shot. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, yes, I played two shows as well last Thursday and Friday at the Redwood Theater in Toronto. And so that was a bit of a mountain to climb. I hadn't played a gig in 7 years. And I played the entire 10 Telecaster Tales as the first set on both nights. So I shot video and did a digital recording. So who knows? We might follow up with some kind of 10 Telecaster Tales live version, or I don't know. This is the first time I've ever done something where we kind of focused on streaming right out of the box. So there was downloads at bandcamp.com of the 10 things, and then there was streaming that you could get anywhere you liked. But of course, what I'm still hoping to do is sell a lot of the paperback version of the book wherever, bookstores and Amazon, wherever you like to get your favorite reading materials. So
All right. Well, now that we piqued people's interest about the book here, tell us about, how and why the book came to be here.
I designed a guitar, and then that was sort of a Telecaster based, well, a hybrid. A Telecaster meets a Les Paul, and I have it. It's not handy, but I don't want to get up and break the flow of this fabulous podcast. But so that's how it started. I was writing pieces. I thought maybe I could record them on the guitar, all on this one guitar. And that seemed to be formulating in a solid kind of way. And then I started thinking, well, liner notes, that'd be really cool. But, I'm probably not going to want to be doing vinyl. So what if I maybe wrote a book and then we did a CD and we put it in the back of the book? So I did those, like a limited edition hardcover with the CD in the back. And then, the ECW Press being the way they are, and my editor and stuff, they sort of said, well, we're going to do a paperback. Can't you maybe do it so that you just do downloads? And I went, yeah, okay, we can do downloads and we can do a paperback. And it turned out to be, as I said to my editor in the process, and then it ended up more or less being the subtitle of the book. It's going to be the most comprehensive liner notes that ever existed for a solo guitar album in the history of the planet Earth. And he went, yeah, I think that's a good subtitle. So we shortened it a little, but that's essentially it. It's like a book of liner notes. And I talk about the origins of the songs, and I talk about the influences, and I talk about how we recorded them and my feelings about the digital universe. I tried to avoid politics as much as possible, but I am a tangent man, and there's a lot of stuff in there, stuff about music history and psychology and my own sort of background and uh, where my roots came from as I was approaching these tunes and all that kind of stuff. But I enjoy the idea of generating something that's functioning like an integrated hybrid of my writing, both prose and poetry. There's a poem in there,
Hmm.
and just my love of music and the making of music, the writing of music, and then maybe people might find it a little pedantic, maybe from time to time, didactic, maybe, but I'm a bit of a teacher. It's always sort of been a part of, and I taught college for a couple of decades. So, there's going to be a little of that professing kind of stuff in there, and I'm unapologetic about it, even though I realize it's not everybody's cup of tea. You know, some people get a book and they're just looking for a good murder mystery or something, you know. So it's not necessarily recreational reading, but I think if you love music and if you love guitar, then I think it will be, recreational and in the best sense of that it'll be, maybe a little bit inspiring and motivating and all of those kinds of things too. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a guitar player and, I don't really play music at all, but it was interesting seeing all your perspective on a lot of your influences and how you tied in a lot of artists, and it was very interesting read from that perspective. So, but yeah, obviously, whoever, if you play guitar, this is definitely a must-have book because you give us every little detail in there about a lot of all these songs that you wrote. And
there's been a couple of books by the guy from Wilco, Jeff Tweedy, and I enjoyed them both. And they did serve as a kind of an inspiration for me as to, how I'd at least get started, you know. So, uh, but, I mean, there's so much stuff. I had read David Byrne's book, How Music Works, and there have been some things in there that sort of ended up, starting some discussion in the book. Obviously, you mentioned the influences. Like when you have a Telecaster guitar as the leaping off point, this is where it's all starting. Well, the history of the Telecaster, it predates me by a couple of years. I was born in 53 and Telly's kind of started coming into existence in 49 and 50. And um, so there's a history there that I could get into a lot. And then the players, the guys that
mhm.
got it all started. Roy Buchanan was a huge early influence on me. And I mean, all of the Yardbirds guys, the Beck, Clapton, Page guys, they were all Telly guys when they were in the Yardbirds. And Page, in fact, when he started Zeppelin, he was playing on a Telly. So it was a really important guitar in the American musical landscape. Um, then, of course, an important guitar for me in my little musical landscape. But I mean, players like Steve Cropper and man, the name is escaping me now, but the guy that played like for Ricky Nelson and Elvis Presley, and he was a dyed in the wool telly guy in the early days. James Burton, like tremendous player. So all of that stuff. It's the guitar that's kind of a linchpin between country and western and R&B and Motown and Stax Volt and Steve Cropper. There's another one. Like you could just name drop for the next half an hour.
And there's a lot of name drops in the book, which is nice to see. Kind of gives a good introspective of how you came to liking a lot of this music and the way you describe a lot of the textures and tones that you use and everything in here. Very unique. Um,
Thank you.
so you go back, you say this started from 21 to 24. So basically you started around the time of the pandemic was already going on and you decided to start doing this whole project here. And you said that kind of is a portrait of yourself from those years. Now, what I want to ask was, did you always look at it from a perspective in time like that, or was there a point during your career where you started to kind of look at it like that?
Well, I mean, when you say portrait, um, that seems to imply that it might be that one thing is defining. But in truth, during the COVID pandemic situation, I was also writing a book of poetry and still writing songs. This just ends up being the thing where I go, okay, I'm going to focus this, and this is going to be this facet of who I am. This is going to be one uh, focused kind of side of me that I'm going to, reveal and turn into creative work.
Mhm.
When you say portrait, I tend to think of all of the things that are in my life, which my family, my grandchildren, the books that I read, the garden that we keep, the pets that we have. Life is uh, the food that I love to cook and eat. There's just so much stuff that if I was doing a portrait, and of course I've written a memoir, so I also know what it's like to say, okay, I'm going to try to make a sort of a definitive, uh, I don't know, literary picture of myself.
Mhm.
But there's lots of stuff that you're always leaving out. Life is far more complex than that. I mean, here's a good metaphor, right? You're looking at this picture of me and you see all these guitars, you see them and then look down here, look at all those tellies. So I only did one telly, one record, one book, but I could expand the notion out a lot more. But sometimes, the way a writer might say that, the truth of the universe might be captured in the smile of a baby, or the whisper of the wind through the trees. Like truth comes in little tiny bites all the time. You just have to be trying to listen to hear it. And I think that, with the Telecaster Tales, you're really only just taking pictures, and here's these snapshots of here's a story. One of the reasons that there's like 27 illustrations in the book by Janine Leach, and they're fantastic illustrations. She did a really beautiful job. It's because I kind of wanted to create the impression of almost like fairy tales, like a storybook. These are only 10 stories. There's only 10 pieces.
Mhm.
My world is filled with a lot more stuff than that, but it's kind of like a good exercise in self-discipline for me to say, no, no, try to make it palatable. Try to reduce it to a point where this becomes what people can focus on, digest. You know, I do tend to be somebody with a lot of tangents. Said the guy that can keep talking when you ask one tiny little short question. I can keep talking for hours. So the tangents, I tried to restrict them as much as I could. And I think that finally answers your question.
All right. Well, looking back at your early career in writing there, obviously it seemed like in the early albums for Triumph, you guys kind of just had individual writing credits on the songs. It looks like I think after Just a Game is when you finally started showing it as a group effort. What made you go in that direction, and how did the songwriting process change for you guys?
Well, the songwriting process never changed. It was more a question of the dynamics of the business of the group. So in the early stages, first three albums, when you wrote a song and you brought it down to rehearsal, it was your song, and essentially it was just mostly Gill and me. Oh, and we'd bring our song ideas down, and then the band would have to work up arrangements, and sometimes a song would require a lot of arranging, you know. And I say that with a smile when I'm thinking about Gill's songs. Uh, and that's fine. That, when you're in a band and you're first starting out, and then the growth is starting to happen and success is coming, then there's not necessarily a lot of things where you're being discriminating. You're really just you're happy to try to make anything work. You're making all kinds of compromises and collaborating on a whole bunch of different levels. In the case of Triumph, Gill was sort of slowly but surely becoming pretty much the general manager of the band. And he was the production manager, and he was the general manager, and he was the guy that sort of uh, did a lot of the bookkeeping and had his dad doing bookkeeping in the early days. And it was, you know, and Mike was the guy that was handling the record company liaison and marketing and promotion and all of those kinds of things. Rik was the guy that was, writing some tunes and bringing them down to rehearsals, and hopefully was going to be writing some tunes that were going to get us on the radio and all of that stuff. So After the in particular the third album, Just a Game, had Lay It on the Line and Hold On it, and they both got a considerable amount of radio play, especially in the United States first. They kind of broke the band, and they were my songs. And I realized when I was getting my uh, composer publishers checks from SOCAN, I went, "Oh my God, I'm going to be making a lot more money than the other guys." And I went, "That's no good," because they're in a position where money from the other aspects of the business is crossing their desk. And if they wanted to screw me, they sure could. And if they felt like they were getting screwed because Rick was getting rich and they weren't, because Rick wrote the hit songs. The other thing I felt like I didn't want to create bad blood in the band that, oh, Rick's having all the hit songs, Rick's becoming the star, and everybody loves Rick, and nobody's paying attention to me anymore. So I went in one day to Gill's office and said, let's just split it three ways from now on. You can't go back and change the old ones. I said, I'll just take my SOCAN checks and I'll chuck them into the band account, and we'll keep splitting the money three ways. Um, it didn't really solve one of the issues, which was if Gill sang a song, it didn't really do as good at radio. They liked high tenor singers, they liked Foreigner and Rush and Styx and Journey, and Triumph kind of fell into that category, and Gill's voice didn't. So it hurt the band a little bit that in the end we were always trying to get hit songs for Gill, and I don't regret that I splitted the songwriting. Splitted? Is that right? That I split the songwriting three ways? Uh, because I think in the end that has benefits for rhythm sections in bands, because they're always the guys that are looking for a paycheck and wanting the band to go out on the road because it's the only time they're getting paid. Whereas Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are laughing all the way to the bank. So, and it broke up the Beatles and it broke up the Police. So, and in the end it sort of broke up Triumph too, but I was trying to make sure that it wouldn't. Yeah, like a song like, say, Magic Power, you
Hmm.
know, I wrote it, 100%, and we just would teach the guys, like, somebody's out there. I demoed it the way the arrangement was, when I brought it back to the band, because it was an 11th hour thing on Sport of Kings where they were looking for a lead single. They wanted something very commercial. I wrote the song, and when I brought it down to the band, back to the band 2 days later, I said, "You're not changing a note. This is the way we're doing it. This is the arrangement. Let's just do this." And so we did. And it was the highest charting Billboard song we ever had. So it wasn't that I lacked an ability to be able to build an arrangement or have an imagination to know how a song should go. Gill's songs needed a lot more work. And then, of course, then we were doing outside tunes from outside writers in order to try and find hit songs for Gill. So that required a certain amount of band arranging and time learning the tunes and stuff. But anyhow, um, I still think it's good to split songs evenly inside bands. But I don't know. I also think that when I went solo and I started to have what I always describe as a benevolent dictatorship, it suited me more. And of course, now I write books, I write songs, I write guitar pieces, and I don't have to share them with anybody. And part of the joy of that is you don't need as big a pie. If I was still sharing everything two-thirds, a third to Mike, a third to Gill, you need a pie that's three times as big. So
I
anyhow,
Yeah. Well, while you mentioned that Gill, what is your favorite song that Gill's actually sings on? Which one would you pick out of your personal likeness there?
uh, oh geez, I really liked the vocal that he had on "Young Enough to Cry" on "Just a Game." Like I really thought that was kind of Gill's wheelhouse, was kind of songs like "Fool for Your Love," and earlier than that, "Rocky Mountain Way." He was the vocalist on, and it did good at radio in Canada. It did great. Um, so I always thought he had a nice bluesy, somewhere between Paul Rogers, Bad Company kind of a thing, and he was a little bit more like a Ted Nugent kind of he wanted to be a kind of a screamer, shouter, rock and roller kind of character. But when he just settled in and he just kind of sang blues, R&B,
Mhm.
he had a nice quality in his voice. And yeah, one of his, and we shared a lot of likes, and one of our favorites was Mickey Thomas, a Starship.
Mhm.
He could, like, he sang on the original "Fooled Around and Fell in Love" by Bishop, Elvin Bishop.
Mhm.
That's Mickey Thomas singing on that, and it's a fantastic vocal. He's such a great singer. He sings on the new Triumph tribute album. Mickey does, and yeah, just a great, great vocalist. But again, he was a
Yeah.
little higher than Gill's range. Gill needed to be just a little bit lower than that. So
Yeah. When you look at you did do a couple collaborations, obviously, throughout your career there. Did you take a different approach writing songs, or how did those collaborations work out when you were writing with somebody else?
sometimes you just have small pieces of ideas for songs and you bring them down to a co-write situation and you sit there and you go, okay, I think this is a verse, or I think I got a bit of a verse and chorus, but I don't have a bridge. Well, I mean, the Beatles, when they wrote songs, they hardly ever wrote together. It would be more a question of John would have a verse and a chorus, and then Paul would suggest a bridge, or vice versa. I think that sometimes you're going around the room, there's more than two writers in it, and if you're in the room, you should be in for a fair share, a fair split, because sometimes a guy will make a suggestion of a song for a song, and it's only one riff that's going, say, into a verse, or towards the end of the song in a coda or something. But it's a contribution, and it would be uh, Solomon trying to slice the baby up to say, well, did that idea only have a 1/12 value to the song, or a 1/8 value to the song, or should he just get an equal share? And I think if you're in this old Nashville thing, if you're in the room, you should get an equal share if a creative process is going on. And I think that's only fair and right. Having said that, in the music business is often not the way that it works.
Mhm.
Paul Simon wrote a song called 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, and he's hiring Steve Gadd as the drummer. And at a certain point, Steve Gadd is going, and they go, what is that? That's fantastic. Hey, let's use that as the bottom basis, the foundation for 50 Ways. And everybody thinks of 50 Ways and they think of that groove. And Steve Gadd does not get any songwriting. He
Mhm.
doesn't get any royalties for that. At session guys like Steve Lukather probably should have got some royalties for playing on Michael Jackson records, and Lord knows how many albums he played on, where he came up with pretty cool parts. Solos that kind of, I'd be a kid sitting there listening to the song and waiting for the solo to come and go, oh, it's a great guitar solo, man. That must be Steve Lukather. So they just get paid for their time in the studio. So that's a sort of a weird, strange thing about songwriting splits. But um, sometimes I would bring a song down and it would be 100%, and I'd play it for the guys, and yep, that's the way we record it. And then Mike and Gill would get 2/3 of it anyways.
All right, so give us an example of how, like, because you brought Rick Sanders in, he played a lot of the live shows with you near the end because I guess it was harder to play the songs live, from what I understand. So you needed an extra hand up on stage to help out with a lot of that.
Yeah, he because he was pretty good keyboard player and also guitarist, and he could also sing really good. And so there would be harmony vocals in tune, which in the Triumph circumstance for a lot of years there wasn't. Like uh so yeah, it was like I kind of put my foot down and said we need a fourth guy that can. Plus, I didn't like the fact that in the early days, Power Trio, you know, uh, guitar solo comes and the middle of the song kind of falls out because now you've got lead and you've got bass, but you've got nothing that's playing chords. On records, of course, there's always overdubs where that stuff is, being filled in. So I wanted the live thing to be more of a reflection of the records we were making. And almost from the get-go, we were always using overdubs. There was always rhythm guitars under solos and, harmony parts on guitar lines and harmony singing. And so, yeah, had to get some of that going on the live stage.
So take us through Take a Stand then, because he also got a songwriting credit on there with you guys.
He'd written the song and he'd given me the demo. I'd heard it and he had that hook. Take a stand, da da da. And I think we might have made it a little more, we might have dressed it up with a little bit more heavy riffing kind of thing. But he essentially had the idea of the no 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 wang, wang, no, 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 no. Like he had that, and it was a really cool part. And we went, okay, let's see if we can't work up this tune. So he had that verse idea, and he had a chorus. Now, it's possible that I had maybe rewritten the chorus so that it had that take a stand in the night,
Mhm,
na 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 na, like to give it some sort of a chorus hooky
mhm.
kind of structure. I can't remember, but I can tell you for sure that uh, Sanders already had written the thing. There was a song later too on Never Say Never was on the
Mhm.
Surveillance album, and Sil Simone, and he kind of written that tune and had a demo of it, and we might have did some window dressing with it, but essentially Sil had written the tune kind of.
All right. Well, the book is out now, 10 Telecaster Tales. And what's next for you now that the book is out?
I am going to leave in next week and fly to Paris for 5 days and have a holiday, and then we're going to go up and get on a river cruise, go all the way down from Amsterdam to Switzerland, and take our sweet time. And then when I come back, I'm going to sort of take a look at my life and decide. There's a poetry book coming out in the fall that I've already given that to ECW.
Hmm.
It's called Leaning Into It. So that'll come out in the fall. I have a bunch of songs written, vocal tunes. I don't know what I'm going to do with them, work them up as a band or work them up as just a singer-songwriter kind of thing. The uh, the stuff that I'd had is download off my site. It was called the Bonfire Sessions. That's now going to be all put out in streaming over the next little while. So over the next, I think, 4 months or 5 months, those bonfire songs are all going to come out as little packages of their own little EPs, kind of onto streaming. And if that works, then I might consider that the new songs that I do, I might do them the same way. Uh, but I might write a book about it too. I'm not sure what'll develop. And, you know, there's also a part of me where I am going to give some serious consideration to sort of hanging up the idea about playing guitar and writing songs and singing and um, maybe just only do it here in Eli's loft and share them for streaming. I don't think I'm ever going to go out and play live again. I'm not sure about that, but I took 7 years off and I didn't
Hmm.
really miss it. And then when I went back to do it last week, I kind of went, oh yeah, I remember why I'm, not keen on this. There's a lot of stress and a lot of it's a high mountain to climb, to play live gigs. So you know, I don't know. Dogs barking, somebody's at the front door. I gotta go.
Well, we'll see what happens down the road. Appreciate your time once again.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Joseph. All right, take care.